play Citizens of Everywhere.
Oh, yes. Okay.
It's an interesting one. So I think this one is not related to sex. I think, at least based on the title. So I wanted to pick one. I wanted to pick a sexless play, not because I have a problem with that topic, but I will be interested in exploring this one as well.
Yeah.
So one of the things you explore in your work is the migration and how people relate to the place where they live, what they can do with their lives, belonging, and all that. Is there a relation between that play and Brexit?
Yes, there is. So this is touching on what we talked about earlier, Vitor, with the kind of the family background. So, being from the UK, but having parents who were not from the UK, who were there as a result of European migration. So my mother would have been an economic migrant to the UK, as many Irish people have been historically. And my father's family would have come from Poland after the end of the Second World War, because my father's uncle had been in the Polish army, which then became part of the British army. So a lot of people came to Britain from Poland. So I've always kind of thought of myself as a European person, because that makes sense to me, because I have 3 different countries in the mix there. And then the UK goes and leaves Europe, which totally destabilizes that, European and this strange other country that doesn't want to be neighbourly, doesn't quite have the same ring to it. So that prompted me, it was Brexit that prompted me to come and live in Dublin, because I do have that real kind of strong ideological commitment to the EU. I think it's such an interesting experiment with having a pan-national government. No one's really tried that before. That's really exciting and really at testing the limits of participatory democracy. I think it's thrilling stuff. The EU thrills me, and just the values of it, that you can be from all over the world. My parents were from 2 different countries. I live in Dublin now. My partner is Spanish. It's this amazing kind of melting pot. I love that. I think it's so important. And it really upset me to see it destabilized. So anyway, I'm going on a bit because this is because my heart is broken. That's why I'm going on a bit.
I totally understand.
Yeah.
You think it was a bad decision from British people to leave EU?
I just don't know. I don't know how informed people were.
Too early to tell, or
I think some people. I don't know many people who voted for Brexit. I will be candid about that. Most of my social circle voted the other way. I do know some people who did, and who are still happy that they made an informed decision and that they felt it was the right decision. So that's great. I'm happy for them. I'm not happy for the people who voted for it, thinking it was going to, help fund the NHS or whatever it was they were led to believe, and have now found out that's not true, and who are standing in 3-hour queues at a passport line in the airport kind of going, what's happened? Why am I being discriminated against? I don't understand. That's a real shame that I think there is a population of people who voted for it without knowing the consequences, and I feel sorry for them. That's terrible. Yeah. It's really, really shocking. It's a bit like the last referendum we had here of if you don't understand the consequences, then be very be careful about what decision you make. And in retrospect, I'm not totally surprised that didn't pass, because people didn't understand it, and that is the safe option to take. And if only the same logic had applied to Brexit,
Yeah, no, I agree. Like in terms of information, it's very hard to know where is the good source these days, especially because the big players, they try to take advantage of those topics for their own benefit. Let's say they sit on the yes side, and for that they will reinforce their position, as politicians or as influencers in society. And those who would be in favor of no, they want to start a new rebellion. So they don't really care that it stays as it is, just a tool, to tell that they still have some place, they still have a voice. So I'm kind of skeptical in terms of the people who are telling you to vote yes or no in those things, because I'm talking to big people. I'm not talking about talking to you, or I'm saying most talking about governments, NGOs, and media, corporations, press. All that. They're all agents, so it's very hard. So the best is try to make up your mind on what is it about, and not just rely on what you see, from the big organizations.
Yeah, but in a previous life, I had an academic career before I went on to all kinds of different things. So for a while, I was teaching in a university in the UK, and I was teaching in a humanities department. So I was giving people their kind of general introduction to European history and intellectual history. And one of the things we were supposed to be achieving through that course is to teach people how to critically assess information.
Yeah.
You give them lots of sources to read, you give them historical accounts that conflict with each other, and you ask them to use their judgment and make up their own mind. Now, at the time I was teaching, it was just after, I think, the Liberal Democrat Conservative coalition had been elected in the UK. So it was the beginning of this very long Tory rule that we're still seeing the consequences of. Rule. And one of the things they were saying at that time about higher education, they were gutting out the humanities departments. The department I started my PhD in was not the department I graduated in, because they were getting smaller and smaller, and the funding was contracting, and they were merging together and all this kind of stuff. They were really pushing this idea that if you want a proper education, if you want to be a proper economically productive member of society, you've got to do science, technology, engineering, or maths. STEM, STEM. This is what we want people to do. This is what we want to be competitive in. And they defunded and defunded and defunded the humanities. They have a population, they're raising a population of people who can't think critically. And I think that suits them.
Yep.
And now we see how much difficulty people have navigating information online and all this talk of fake news and all this kind of stuff, because that skill, the skill of critical reading, is essential to being a citizen in a democracy, and it's just under attack. The humanities are silly. They don't make money. We don't need them. Yeah, we do. We really do, because if you get rid of them, you're going to end up with Brexit. So.
I agree with you again. It's like we, the human. I'm also on the humanities side as my education and most of the things I do in life.
Yeah.
I believe that we are the core of civilization, and that's something massive. Now, it's not as profitable as other things, but they do matter. We are just underneath, and we are not that visible. So I understand that sometimes we need to be behind the queue. I get it.
Yes.
But it doesn't mean that we are not there. We are absolutely needed. And if you are not, if you are removed, they are going to create an earthquake. Like Brexit. Now, in terms of Brexit, I have friends who voted yes, friends who voted no. I understand both. I understand both. I just think that people who voted yes were very naive. They thought that, okay, Brussels will stay there. We will look after our country, and things will be fine for British people. And it's not that mathematic. It doesn't work like that, And the UK still has issues with migration. It didn't get any better since Brexit. And that was the main message of the yes, that we are going to give back the country to the people. Was it given back? I don't think so. Not that I'm not in England, so I don't want to make a big assumption, but probably not. So, and I understand that they were unhappy with some things that are happening in Brussels. I totally get it. But maybe the way to tackle is not to walk away, is to stay there and change it.
Yes. I think so.
And then, you're moving out to a small village, and we didn't only move to a small village, we moved to a house that was probably 2 kilometers from that village. So right out in the middle of nothing, there was nothing around. we also moved to
When
a
you say there
house.
was nothing, like, what, sorry to interrupt you, what was lacking? What was what were the things that you missed the most, and from the beginning, like you were looking around and they were not there? Was there anything you can recall?
Well, I guess, I suppose for me, just people. It really was the middle of nowhere. And we moved to a house that had no electricity, no water. It was fairly, falling apart. And we moved from a lovely apartment in the city centre to fairly falling apart, no electricity, no water house. Also, a house that at that time was very much out on its own. There wasn't any houses nearby. That's all changed, but there were no houses nearby. So we were quite, not even just living in the village, but we were living really outside the village, and I guess every kind of contact we had to have, you had to go into the village to go to the shop and actually to go and get water for the first year. While we were getting set up. So there was quite a lot of things, I suppose. Now, as a child of 9, I don't think it really, made a huge impact on me. I guess the big thing that we really loved about when we moved there was we had loads of space everywhere. There was just countryside around us. There was trees. We had a huge garden in comparison to what we had in Dublin, which was nothing. And, so we were able to be outside all the time, and that was great. It was really good. But,
which was a thing, like, that kids will be out and about, which I think it's I wouldn't say it's gone, but it's not the exact, it's not the exact scenario that kids have that they had back in the. We're talking about the late 70s, early 80s.
So it would have been 1981, 82 when we moved to Galway. So you're talking about a whole different time, Vitor. We were outside all the time. Basically, we'd have breakfast and we'd be gone, and we'd be in the garden or whatever, and we might come in for lunch, maybe. If we were still in the garden, because we'd be off in the fields. We would go adventuring in the fields. We'd be, whatever. And there was certain summer days where my mum would literally say bye at breakfast, and we'd come back at dinner time starving. But she wouldn't see us. And I think that's probably a big thing that has changed a lot in that time, is that, you wouldn't really do that now. You know what I mean? We're lucky my son can play here on the green, and that's fine, but we can see him all the time. But then my mum wouldn't have seen any of the three of us for the whole day, and there wouldn't be any bit of worry about it, because there was such a safe, open environment. We were just adventuring and playing, and sometimes we'd be in our own garden, but often we would be in the fields or in a forest nearby, or we'd be making a tree house or whatever, So that was I guess, living there at that stage was a good thing, because we suddenly had all this free space and freedom. We were given a lot of freedom, so we could just go and do all these adventures and stuff like that. And that's something that's quite different to now, I imagine. In fact, I know it's very different to now. But
you have a son, so probably you can compare.
Exactly.
In a way that money,
it's
not
kind
others
of funny now looking back at that time. My mum had 3 of us on her own, so she was the everything, if you like. But there's a lot of things that my mum would have let us do, which I wouldn't allow my son to do now.
Can you name one or two?
Just, that fact, right? So, let's say we'd leave at 9 o'clock in the morning, and she wouldn't see us until 6 o'clock at night. And she wouldn't have thought for 1 second that something would be wrong. Whereas if I don't see my son for 10 minutes, I'm kind of going, well, where is he? Do you know what I mean? So there's that, I suppose, safety maybe thing that's changed a lot since then.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a great place to go to in terms of that freedom and that kind of, countryside, do what you want, weren't restricted in any way. And it was a great place to grow up in after the first few years, because it wasn't the easiest place to move to.
And why was that?
Well, you see, Ireland was a very different place then. So there weren't, now if you go to a village anywhere in the west of Ireland, it's going to have a Thai restaurant. It's going to have an Indian restaurant. It's going to have a Chinese place. There's going to be people from everywhere, from Brazil, from wherever. Every little village now has people from everywhere. At that time, we were very much the first foreign family in the village, like it was, it wasn't, people weren't very accepting us. We also, I suppose, my mum lived quite an alternative lifestyle. I suppose that was one part of it. We also weren't involved in the church, and at the time, religion and the church was the center point in Ireland. We weren't involved in that. She was a single mum, so she wasn't like most of the families who were, two parents and whatever amount of kids. There was a lot of reasons, and at the time, I guess that's one good thing that over the years that I've noticed, is that Ireland is more accepting now of people who are from different backgrounds or who come from different places or whatever it is. At that time, it wasn't as accepting, and it took quite a while for us to settle into the place. And I mean settle by being accepted. It took, and I'm not talking 1 or 2 years, it took a good few years before we were kind of accepted. It wasn't an easy place to come to in those kind of terms. We also moved to
do you know Gdansk? I can't remember.
I've been there. I've been there twice, only for weekends.
Yeah,
but I've been
well,
there
it's
twice.
a very beautiful city, as you know. It's a Hanseatic city. It actually looks more Dutch than Polish because it was built by Dutch merchants, basically in the 16th century. So, I mean, it looks more like Amsterdam actually than it looks like other Polish cities, but it's very beautiful. And the nearby town of Sopot is wonderful as well. I love that.
And I think there is one more. As far as I remember, they call it the Tree City, which is
Gdynia.
Yeah.
Which is where Solidarity and Lech Wałęsa came from, and that was really the beginning of the end of the Soviet Union. I like the Poles. I'm a big fan of the Poles. The Poles are very, very, very impressive people. Probably the most intellectual people I've come across. That a colossal number of them seem to be formidably educated, and they often have this extremely impressive range of interest, and you find quite ordinary people doing just amazing things. For example, one of the secretaries in the school I worked at played cello in a string quartet, and she was very good. And everyone I seemed to know seemed to be, they were in bands, or they were acting or painting or writing, or there was a ferment of cultural activity. The Poles were the best students I ever had.
In your whole life?
In my whole life, I think. Yeah, I mean, they worked so hard. You never had any discipline problems. They were extremely intelligent, extremely motivated. I mean, a real joy to teach. I don't think I've ever had such a good experience with any students.
Actually, that resonates with what my sister mentions about students coming from different parts of the world, which is more and more a thing in Portugal. So we have, like, let's say, 3 different main sources of foreign students. We have the Eastern Europeans, so there are Polish, Moldovans, Romanians, and others. Then we have people coming from the Portuguese speaking countries, former colonies, Angola, Mozambique, Brazil, and others. And then we have a new wave coming from India, Bangladesh, Nepal. And your comments really echo what my sister mentions about the Eastern Europeans, the discipline, the fact that they put interest and passion and dedication to the work, the respect, plus the intellect. They have really, really intelligent, and they care. And I think all together that makes a good student.
Yes. Yeah. There was, I was in Gdansk from, let's see, when was it? It was 1993. So it was not long after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And there was this very exciting sense at the time that the world was opening, everywhere actually, but especially in those Central European countries, there was a tremendous optimism. Life was still difficult. Poland was still quite poor at the time, poorer than Portugal it would have been at that time, actually. And people's lives were still quite difficult, but they were very, very optimistic. There was just a buzz, there was a kind of air of excitement, which was really, really kind of thrilling in a way. So yeah, I was very impressed with Poland, actually.
So were you finally an attraction in the good sense of it?
Yes.
Yeah, I was waiting for that moment. After being an oddity in Portugal, at least you were an attraction in the midst of the optimism. So yeah, I think many people will be jealous of that opportunity. Right person in the right time. At some point, I think sometime in the 70s, you started a nightclub in Leeson Street. And for those who don't know, those who are not that familiar with Dublin, Leeson Street is on the southern side of the city. It's, at least since I live here, which is since 2010, is the posh part of Dublin. So how was it to initiate a nightclub in that context?
Well, if you go back to the time, and the time was 1969, discotheque was never heard of. And my father was a well-known doctor from Dundee, and I went to him and I said to him, it was nice to see, I was 18, I think, at the time. I said, Dad, I want to start a discotheque. He said, a what? A discotheque. He said, what's a discotheque? And I explained it. He said, you want to open a room with a record player? People have record players at home, Morris. I'm not giving you money to do that. And by the way, what would they drink? Because you couldn't get a drink license then. You'd have to buy a pub for $1 million or a hotel for 10 million. So, I'm going to sell wine. What? The only wine Irish people drank in the 69, 70 was Matthew's Rosé on a Saturday night. And he said, are you telling me someone's going to go into your club on a Monday night, an Irish fellow says, give us a glass of wine? You're crazy. This will never work. So eventually, I'm not giving you any money, he said. Eventually, a good friend of his, who was a builder, his son has just started off being a builder. I said, you build me my club, and I will give you the yearly membership, which was 10 shillings, to pay you the back. I think the cost was about $2,500, which is a lot of money then. You could buy an apartment for that. And he built Elizabeth's in a basement in a Leeson Street house. And when I built it, it was all built in caves, and I put a dining room in there and a restaurant. I had no idea what I was doing. I refused to put a sign up because I always reckon, well, if you don't know where it is, you shouldn't be there. So I wouldn't put a sign up. And it was an overnight success. And my father sort of came down the stairs of it, and he liked it. And there's very groovy people were going there. And you must remember, my father's probably about 40 then. So he has a very wealthy crowd of friends, like the Smurfits, and the millionaires were coming. It was the only club in Dublin. And I love Studio 54 in New York. I love the guy. So I started stopping people with beards at a time. I just, at the door, I had my doorman. But the thing which is important, and we can sort of move on from that, all the stars that were in Dublin, like Mick Jagger, the Rolling Stones, when they were in town, they would come to the club. And the rugby, which I was delighted, the rugby fans. And I will share with you something. Well, you probably wouldn't know this, so I wouldn't know This Is Your Life, which my father was a bit of he loved practically jokes. And there was a very famous Irishman called Eamon Andrews, had this huge show on BBC called This Is Your Life. And my father was eating at a restaurant in the Russell Hotel in just in Stephen's Green, then it was the place. And I was on my way to the club, and he phoned me, and he said to me, you better come here for dinner. And I said, for what? He said, no, you better come here for dinner. And I said, why? And I came anyway, and I sat down. He said, now, what night is it? I said, it's Wednesday. Yes, and what happens on Wednesday? I said, I go to my club. And he said, no, but on television. He said, I shouldn't be telling you this, but Eamon Andrews is doing This Is Your Life on You Tonight. And normally Eamon Andrews does like world famous people. So I said, where's Eamon Andrews? He said, look around. And there he was sitting behind me. And I actually believed my father that he was going to do me on This Is Your Life. I was waiting and waiting. And eventually I said, come on, it's 7:30. The show's meant to start. And I looked around and he'd gone. So that sort of sums up the doctor, my father. But he made my club. He made Elizabeth's by getting all the right people to go there, and it was a great success, and all the beautiful people of Dublin went there, and it was bloody expensive. There's a book written called On Our Knees by Rosita Sweetman, and each chapter is about a famous person like Desmond Guinness, Charlie Haughey, the ex-Prime Minister, the Taoiseach of Ireland, Sean McStiffon, the head of the IRA. And the first chapter was me. I don't know why me. But in that it said it was so expensive, the club, that it was £4 for dinner. So that just shows you how long ago it was. And I invited her to my club, but I got the doorman to stop her because it was very snobby. And I knew by stopping her, she'd write more, which she did. So that sort of sums up Elizabeth's anyway. And oh, yes, of course, I got to tell you, the police, it was illegal. It was a speakeasy. It means you could have a wine it means you could have a wine license at 11 in the evening with dinner. But it's 3 a.m. All these people are sitting there drinking their wine, and the next minute through the peephole, you could see the Garda Síochána, the silver bottles, and the lights would flash, and the tables would be cleared. So these police would walk in at 3 a.m, and all these people are sitting there, dining tables with nothing on them, and that was okay until. Am I talking too much?
No, it's okay. I just want to ask you one thing. So you said that people didn't know what was a discotheque. Was that the reason for you to launch one, or was there any other?
Yes, no. It was the reason. I was in London and I saw one and said, "Boy, I want this." Because before that, I was a drummer. I thought I was going to be the next Beatle, the next Ringo Starr, and I actually went and played in Germany with my band, who had done very well. We had a record out, and it was quite interesting. The record was produced by John Paul Jones, who was flown over from London to do it. And I went home to my father and I said, he's so poor, he's rolling his own cigarettes. That's how naive I was. But John Paul Jones, as you know, then went on the bass player as with the Moody, not the Moody Blues. Yeah, the Moody Blues. Was it John Paul Jones? No, not the Moody Blues. Sorry, they were Led Zeppelin. And he produced our first record. So I was a drummer, so I had great ambitions to be famous. A nightclub seemed the right thing,
Yeah.
So that's what that was the start of it. I opened more clubs, but
so that was like the gateway to fame. Like you realize that there was a path there. So maybe that's the way forward. So that's the direction.
But it was illegal, and the police got me in the end. Robert Kennedy, I don't know if John F. Kennedy's brother was in town, and they booked the club that night, and security was everywhere. And the police came, and I said to them, listen, guys, tonight is not the night to raid my club, because Robert Kennedy's in there, Charlie Haughey's in there, the Taoiseach, So Inspector Malone of Harker Terrace said, well, maybe we won't come in tonight. But someone was standing at the door and heard that and gave it to the newspapers. The Independent said, Maurice Boland tells the police to go away. And Inspector Malone phoned me, said, you're finished. I'll get you for this. And he did.
So it seems that the fact that the Prime Minister, or the Taoiseach, I'm just saying Prime Minister, for those who are not in Ireland, they probably don't know what does that mean. The fact that the Prime Minister was there didn't save your ass.
No, he didn't save my ass then. He was a friend of my parents. No, it was 3 raids in a row, and 2 raids in a row, and then he promised, he said, sell the club and I'll leave you alone. But it's very funny because I don't know if I can say this on your... Charlie Haughey, I think, was having a little bit of a fling with Terry. It's not fair to name her name. She was a very well-known journalist. And it said in Private Eye, the big British magazine, that he was caught horizontal jogging in my office in the club, in the Taoiseach. There was some very interesting stuff. The press then got very involved with me in a way. So, I married a very, very beautiful model and very well known. And life was interesting.
When it comes to the Irish ethos, one of the things that I think is evident that you guys are very much into music, especially live music. Why do you think? Why do you think there is this inclination from Irish people towards songs and singing and all that?
I think it's pretty easy because we're an island nation on the edge of Europe, and when you're an island, you're isolated, and when you're isolated, you have to make your own entertainment. And so down through the years, we just got used to having to entertain each other, whether it was writing or dancing or performing music. That's what I always think. Because we're an island, we need to entertain ourselves. And we always do. And it's now intergenerational. We always have to just find new ways. But the unfortunate thing about it, Vitor, is that there's music venues closing down, or there's music venues that there's not as many venues or places to play as there was maybe 20 years ago. But at the same time, the band that I rehearse with, the Full Irish, we rehearse in Glasnevin at a really nice little rehearsal studio. Well, not a small rehearsal studio. There's must be about 25 rooms. And every time I go past these rooms, it's packed with music. Absolutely packed with music. There's rock music. It's not just like I've bumped into some kids who are like jamming hip hop. They're like 20, 21. And I've talked to them and they're great kids. I've heard people playing metal. I've heard people playing reggae. I've heard people playing grunge. So it's still alive. There's a call for it. And it's actually more difficult in the last few months to book a studio in this rehearsal place because I don't know, is there more music projects going? Are people... I actually think a lot of it at the moment has to do with maybe Oasis coming back and some younger kids are like, wait a minute, a guitar? People can sell out Croke Park with a guitar and it's electric. It's not just acoustic Ed Sheeran, great Ed Sheeran, great. But maybe kids are looking and saying, whoa. So to go back to your original question, that's why I think isolation, being an island, and I think there's a good demand for music now. I think it's thriving, but we need to give people more places to play.
Yeah, 100%. So when I had a band, we're all teenagers and we were all stupid to a degree. It's part of being a teenager.
We're still stupid.
We're still stupid, exactly, yeah. Even more.
Yeah.
Sometimes. And
always.
We had issues among ourselves, and I think they were mostly related to ego. So we were that dreamers that we would say, okay, in the cover, I want to be on the second page, but and we need to have like 6 pages in between without photos. So the next person has to be in the book in page 8. And we haven't really finished a song. We were already thinking about the CD and all that. So how do you manage egos within a band?
Well, first of all, what you just said there, that's exactly what we did, what you were talking about. when I was 15, that summer, we all decided what instruments we were going to play. And we used to draw pictures of us on stage. Like, so we were a band 6 months before we got our instruments. I remember a month before we all got our instruments at Christmas. Like, we all said, right, at Christmas, we're all going to get a guitar. I'm the drummer. Okay, I'm the drummer. A month beforehand, we were sitting around my house, me and my friends, and we put on the album Evil Empire by Rage Against the Machine. And they have a song called People of the Sun. And the guys who were all going to be in the band, we were all miming, like, to the song. Like, we had no instruments, but some of the guys were pretending they were playing guitar and they were headbanging. I had no drums, but I was playing air drums. And I always remember thinking back to when I was a kid, thinking that was one of the coolest, most innocent times. I'm so lucky to count myself that I had people around me that wanted to do these kind of things, explore music together, be stupid together. I'm so glad I wasn't sitting around on a wall just being an absolute pain in the ass, you know? But sorry, what did you say there a moment ago? Again, sorry, I lost my train of thought.
About the ego management. So, you know.
Yeah, ego management. Sorry, yeah.
Sometimes there are clashes.
Yeah, it does. It can from time to time. I've been very lucky where it's relatively controlled. I mean, I've been very lucky where I've been in projects for most of the time that we all know the reason why we're there and it's the common good. But don't get me wrong, it still happens. There's times where, like, even recently, it's like, okay, let's start the song. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then someone would start playing by themselves and not following the tempo. And it's like, oh, come on, what are you doing? So, I've been very lucky though, Vitor. I haven't really had a lot of problems with egotistical people. We all have an ego, but luckily I've been in bands with people who kind of control it.
Maybe it's also culture, because my perception of Irish that you guys are not as much as egomaniacs like the Mediterraneans. I think, and it's very bad scene if someone is, let's say, bragging in public.
Yeah,
it's almost like a scene where there's, like, in countries like Portugal, Spain, and Italy, if you can afford to brag, then you have the license. Let's say if you make it, you know, if you are successful, then they will allow you to be like a Cristiano Ronaldo, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I think in Ireland it's a bit different.
It's very different. Yeah, you're right. I think it could be a cultural thing as well. You're not allowed to have an attitude really in Ireland, like, because people will just call you out on your crap and say, just shut up or just go away, really. Like, we just don't tolerate BS, really. We don't tolerate nonsense. Sure, there's egotistical people in Ireland, and sometimes we hold it inside, but most of the time, a lot of people don't get away with it. And as I said, I've been very lucky. Sure, we all have egos. I've played on stages hundreds of times. I've seen my best friends shredding guitar solos, literally sliding on their knees onto the dance floor to impress a girl that is at the concert. That happened. I've humbled off stage into the crowd. I've jumped over drum kits. I've smashed cymbals all over the stage. But it's all about an act rather than an ego. It's all about having a bit of fun, like an extension of that.
I suppose 10 or 15 years, I begin to see a different side to the conflict between Israel and
was there any event that caused that change, or?
I suppose, you know, I grew up with Marco in Ireland here. He was raised here, born here and raised here, and he went then on to he went to Italy at 20 or thereabouts or whatever after schooling, and I got back in touch with him, and I suppose when I got back in touch with him, Vitor, I suppose what he did was he didn't try to force something down my neck about the thing, but what he advised me to do was he advised me to read about the conflict. And what I found interesting about him was he told me not just to read one side, but to read both sides. So that you're getting you're getting to a position, then you can make up your own mind on these matters. And I was absolutely flabbergasted when I started reading the material about, about their connection to the Holy Land for over 3,500 years, and that the line here in Ireland here is that they are colonial and they took the Palestinians' land. Now, I have read a number of books, and none of them confirm that. They confirm that the Jewish people are a decent, upright people who do not go around taking people's land. They bought every piece of land that they are on, and land that's occupied, that is occupied, was taken for security reasons, and nothing else. I mean, no other country in the world would put up with what Israel has had to put up with in relation to its lands. But it's the narrative here, Vitor, is that it's always compared here to Ireland under Great Britain for 800 years, and the British on our soil here, and only getting back 20 of the 26 counties back after the treaty and all that. But in that case, it was colonial because and the British were known for being colonial, and so as bad as the IRA were, and they were bad as they were, they never ever did anything like what happened on October 7th to men, women, children, civilians, soldiers. They never did anything like that to anybody. And to compare the two, to me, is a travesty, and an inaccuracy that should be corrected, because it has fed the line here, the consistent line here, that Israel is a colonial power that has taken this land off the poor Palestinians, which is completely untrue. And not only that, but the majority of the exit of the Palestinian people from that area was due to their own people, due to their own leadership, who thought that it could go in and take Israel out after in 1947, again in 1967 and 72. They thought that it could go in and they told their people to leave the land, and you'll be back in it in a matter of weeks, and to me, the Palestinian people are essentially Syrian. They're Syrian people, but it's in the geopolitical interest of all of those Arab states to keep this going, because Israel is the only one true democracy in the Middle East. And this is what really annoys me about Ireland, is that it would take the side of dictators and very, very cruel people, leadership, against over a democracy such as Israel. And Israel's democracy, in my opinion, is way beyond what democracy would be in a lot of countries.
Yeah,
way beyond it. Now, and by the way, the Israelis are not perfect in any way whatsoever. They're not, and the way that some of them have carried on during this war leaves you just leaves your mouth open and gaping as to what in the name of God are they doing, because they're not, but they're not perfect. But in Ireland's case, now at the moment, Netanyahu is the problem. If he's not the problem, it's someone else or something else is the problem. So Ireland has to have a baddie in Israel in order to continue the line that is taken. And yeah, I find that and I find it grotesque, to say the least. And then to cap it all, then to go and recognise the state of Palestine in the middle of a war where they have Hamas have went in and slaughtered children, raped women, slaughtered men, women, and children, and took hostages, and we reward them with this decision by Ireland to recognise the state of Israel, or the state of Palestine.
Yeah, it's shameful. I think they use that as a way to promote themselves because they believe that it's translated into votes. I'm not quite sure if it's exactly the mathematics they are thinking. They might get some popularity, but not as vast as they are expecting. Because I think there is still a gap between what the government thinks of the Middle East and the average people. And I would like to get your thoughts on that. Do you think people are lying? Not as much. What's your perception?
Is this the Irish people?
Yes.
Yeah. I think there is. I see where you're coming from this. I think there is definitely a disconnect between the Irish people and the Parliament. The Parliament is a far left-leaning Parliament, and this narrative has been driven by the far left. To calling on the government to recognise Palestine, and I think it's dangerous for democracy in Ireland to have the Parliament the way it is, because there is no balance of opinion in the Parliament. I could probably count on less than one hand the amount of people who could openly get up in either the Senate or the Dáil, the Parliament, and defend Israel. There's probably less than a handful that would do it. That doesn't mean that there's less than a handful who actually believe that there's something wrong here, and that it's not all Israel's fault. But we've got to the stage now where people are afraid to speak about how they feel on these matters.
Let me ask you the $1 million question that I usually ask some guests, which is, why do you think the humanity is and has always been anti-Semitic? Because it's a different hatred, I think. It's rooted on a different sentiment. Some people don't like Chinese or Indians or Russians or whatever. But Jews, it's like across the board. Doesn't matter what period of the history. You can always find an anti-Semitic on the room. I take it for granted. And I don't know why is that.
I don't think that it's a constant. And there are moments in history when it's not particularly important, other times when it's very dangerous. And I think also the meaning of anti-Semitism has changed quite dramatically. So, for example, if you take the Middle East, historically, anti-Semitism was much weaker in the Ottoman Empire than it was in Europe. And the position of Jewish people in Egypt or in Turkey was much better than it would have been in France or in East Europe. So there are different moments that occurred. I think historically there's a difference between what I call classical Christian anti-Semitism, which is really bound up historically with the charge that Jews had killed Christ and are responsible for all the evil things that have occurred. That kind of anti-Semitism is today much, much weaker than it would have been in the past. And you have a situation where Jews became the enemy precisely because they did not have a nation. And because they didn't have a nation, they were seen as this almost anti-national, globalist force that existed beyond the borders. And a group of people that had no loyalty to Germany or to Hungary or to France or to Britain. And that anti-Semitism, paradoxically, was a reaction to the fact that Jews had lost their homeland. And when Jews regained their homeland, I think that to some extent became tempered and became not so significant. And Israel had a free pass for about 20, 30 years. By and large, in the West, the opinion was very much pro-Israel. And it was only in the 1970s that you had the beginnings of the new kind of anti-Semitism, what I call a left-wing anti-Semitism, a radical anti-colonial anti-Semitism, which has a different source. It's got to do with the fact that hatred for the West was very much focused on Jewish people, because Jews were seen as not just white, but as hyper-white, as somehow they were more successful white than anybody else. And I think that's one of the reasons why all these LGBTQ organizations, all these identity groups are so much for Hamas and so much against Israel.
Which is mad. So here in Ireland, one thing that I found absolutely nuts is the anti-Semitism. It goes from two directions. So you have what we were just saying, the hardcore Catholics who hate Jews because apparently they killed Jesus. And then you have the far left, the likes of Sinn Féin, and then they are all friends with the LGBTQ and all that. And they all get together. When it comes to this, they are best friends. Like, they will never sit in the same pub. They will never cheer for the same on the same crowd. But if it is about Jews, no problem. They are friends like ever.
Well, I think Ireland is an extreme example. It's probably the one nation where hatred for Israel is very, very strong. It's partially got to do with the fact that a lot of Republicans believe that the struggle of Hamas against Israel was like their struggle against Britain. So they kind of identify stupidly with what has gone on there, not realizing that before the Second World War, the Zionist movement and Sinn Féin and the Republicans were very closely allied together. So it was a very different scenario, but they've just lost the plot. And then in addition to that, you have to remember that identity politics is very strong in Ireland. So when you have that Republican tradition, when you also have the identity movement, and then you have some of the old school, incorrigible Catholic hatred for the Christ killers, you have this very strong coalition of anti-Semitism.
We're talking about the cultural difference between Ireland and Italy. I know there's a lot to talk about it, but if you would say right now, what are the cultural differences versus 86 when you moved there? What would be the differences and what would be the things in common?
Okay, well, here's the thing. When I moved in 1986, I went to Bari, down in the deep south. It was very different, very, very different. I came from Dublin. Both countries are Catholic, but I found it was a different type of Catholicism down in Bari. I found it quite difficult to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So to be quite honest, after 2 years, I applied to the University of Pisa and I got a job there. So I moved to Pisa. It had always been my dream to move to Tuscany. It's such a beautiful part of Italy and the world, to be quite honest. And I've been in Pisa ever since 1988.
Going back to Bari, so what were the main challenges? I'm curious to understand what was your struggle. If you want to mention a couple of things, I don't want to go in detail, but okay. I'm very interested to know what is it.
Okay, well, I suppose moving from Catholic Ireland as it was at that stage in the 1980s, there was no abortion, contraception came in 1985. There was no divorce. It was a very conservative country. I moved to Italy, which in theory was more progressive, but to be quite honest, I found, and I'm talking about my experience in Bari, it was extremely hypocritical. It was difficult to deal with the hypocrisy. I moved into a house with a girl and her family because I was trying to coach her for her English. And I went out on my first Saturday evening in Bari to meet other colleagues I was going to be working with. And I had a very tame evening, came home at midnight to find the girl's uncle waiting for me. He read me the riot act. He said, "Voi nordiche, you northern women, you can't come back at midnight. No, no, no." So I was shocked to my rooty tooth at that. I just thought, it's unbelievable. The man doesn't know me. He knows nothing about me. He's making judgments. He's no right to do that. I found, so there was a curfew at 10. If you wanted to be una ragazza per bene, and that's very important in Italy, to be per bene, proper. If you want to be una ragazza per bene, I had to come home at the curfew at 10. But what went on before 10 just curled my hair. So I found it was very hypocritical. I had to get out of it. I came to Pisa and it was different. Now, it has to be said that Bari, in the meantime, has changed immensely. It's very progressive, very forward-looking. None of that hypocrisy pertains anymore. It's not a thing. And a friend that I made down in Bari, Kelly Giannacco, we're still friends. She's a very close friend, even still. She guided me through thick and thin down there when I was having difficulty making sense of cultural situations. She guided me through. Here's the thing, though. I think as a Catholic, I had some insight into possible hypocrisy. I saw my English friends. They were lost. They didn't know what to do. They couldn't deal with just the hypocrisy. As English people, so many of them just lost their way up and went home. I just went to a different part of Italy and it was fine.
So is it fair to say that you found home in Pisa?
Yes. I have 2 homes now. I'm Dublin. I was born in Dublin. Dublin is my home. Dublin's in my heart. But I have a second home in Pisa. I feel that that's immensely enriching. I've been accepted here. There've been highs and lows, of course, but it's been steep learning curve at times, but it's definitely been worth it. I love Pisa.
I always forget about that trip because it's still my favorite trip. And yeah, it's a long story. I'll try and make it short. Okay. So I was working in Australia. I got a job on a broccoli farm in Tasmania down in the south. So basically I was chopping broccoli. I was cutting it, farming it, harvesting it. And actually I was living in a tent and I was living very cheaply. And every week they were paying me about between $1,000 and $1,500. So if I'm not spending any money and I'm living in a tent, every week I was spending about $60 to $70. So all that money was mine. So after doing that for about 2 or 3 months, I went to check my bank account. I hadn't been to the bank for about 3 months. And I was shocked because I had loads of money that I'd never had before. And it was just around that time that me and 2 of my mates had got lost driving, and we ended up at the Australian Antarctic Centre that helped us find the directions or something. And I was like, hold on, Australian Antarctic Centre. Oh yeah, because the furthest south island of Tasmania, if you keep going, is Antarctica. You're there. So I sat with 2 mates having a beer one night on the south coast of Tasmania, just staring out to sea, watching the sunset. And I said to those 2 guys, I'm going to work on those broccoli farms and I'm just going to spend all that money on a trip to just go to Antarctica. And they probably laughed. We all laughed and nobody thought I would do it. But 6 months later, I had the money and I had enough money to take time off work. I think I took 6 months off at that point. It was the longest break I've had off work. But when I say off work, I was blogging and writing while I was on that trip. So I booked a trip and I got a bargain. At the time, it was a real bargain. It was 5,000 Australian dollars for a 13-day tour of Antarctica. You can't get that. You can't get that anymore. It's the price is dear now. It's gone up. And When I got on the boat, so the boat, I had to get to Argentina on that trip. So when I got on the boat, it was 130 people, and they were all brilliant people, big travelers, all stories. So the 13 days was only 9 of it is in Antarctica, because you got 2 days to get there and 2 days to get back. And those 2 days to get there are not boring. Like, you're just looking out at sea, but the stories we share on the boat, the writing I got done, I had my laptop, I was just writing. There's no internet, of course, which is brilliant, because you can just do all your writing. And of course, I had a sleep. I thought I'll catch up on some sleep. I need a bit of sleep in life. I haven't had enough sleep. And then you wake up with the sunrise, and then we're told, yeah, today we're landing in Antarctica. I mean, it's a dream place. It is a dream destination. It's beautiful. It's unbelievable. And I don't need to go back, because I've seen it. I've seen it with my eyes and with my feet and my hands. I've dived in the snow and been with the penguins and got my passport stamped in Antarctica. So all of that is absolutely beautiful. It's the best trip I've done, and I recommend it.
Can you get off the boat?
Well, of course. I was off the boat. It's for 9 days. Every day you get off. I was swimming in Antarctica.
Where do you sleep? On the boat?
You sleep on the boat. You sleep on the boat. So, like, this is what happens. Generally, Vitor, this is what happens. The boat goes from Argentina, and then it anchors off an island in Antarctica. Then you get off the boat. You go and see that island. We did a hike to the top of the mountain at Couvreville. So we did, I think in those 13 days, I visited the land of Antarctica probably 10 times, because some days you have 2 landings. Some days you land at 9 a.m. on the land. You have a walk. You go to the post office, because, you know, there's a museum in Antarctica. There's a post office. Obviously, the capital city, McMurdo, is massive. It's, you know, 1,000 people live there. And then you've got the penguins, the Polish. I went to the Polish base, which is awesome. I mean, they've even got a bar there, and they've got like a research unit, Chilean base. So, I mean, Antarctica, I wouldn't have gone on the trip if I don't land there, Vitor. There's no way I would pay 5,000 just to see it from a window. No chance. Yeah, and I mean, I was lucky, because my trip had about 10 landings. I've met people that went to Antarctica, got off the boat once and saw it. But we saw about 10 different parts.
That's what I heard. That's like, it's mostly from the window.
Oh, I would never do that then. No, that's not my style. I'd rather stay at home and watch it on YouTube than waste 5,000 on that. So that's interesting. If you do look at my blog, which is Don't Stop Living, I've written about 30 articles in Antarctica, and some of them I wrote on the boat, and they're really not good, because I haven't edited them. I was just like writing them at the time, and then we're called, oh, hey, we need to go to the land, because we've just arrived on this Antarctic coast. Let's go. So I have to close the laptop, save the document, put my clothes on, because Antarctica still is cold. You need to put your proper, because on the boat you're shorts and t-shirt, and then you got to get ready to go. And yeah, it's mega. It's just mega. I think my favorite place in Antarctica where we went to was Deception Island. It's very like a James Bond movie or something. The boat goes through a really narrow passage, and you look on the right and on the left, and you're almost hitting the island, and you have to go through it. And then the captain parks the boat, like anchors the boat in the middle, and it's a whaling station. You hike up a hill, and then you can swim there, because they say the reason you go swimming there is because it's the warmer water, because it's an old volcano. So we all went in to swim. It's not warmer, but it's you know, you have to say you swam in Antarctica. So it's called a polar plunge. I mean, that was great crack.
Is there any memories there for Miriam other than the things they're trying to impose? Is there anything positive you can recall from the time you spent was it Tehran where you grew up, or was elsewhere?
Yes, I was born in Tehran. It's very rare things, but I came from a generation of people that were originally from Tehran. It's not very common. So yeah, I've been there. So I loved what I loved about the country was the culture of art and literature. So I always love it. I love Persian literature. I love the love for literature and art in general. And I really missed it until I came to France, which is the commonality between these two countries. And the other thing that I really loved was the mountains in Tehran. So you could just drive up the mountains and there were nice restaurants and things like that, or shisha, which I missed a lot. That was very positive. And the experience I had. So I got my first master degree there. And the people that I met during the my studies or the works that I was doing, I still appreciate all the experiences. And the other positive thing that I can say is that all the things that I write, in a way, is an outcome of what I felt I was suppressed by, censored by. So that is kind of negative, but it's positive impact. So that's all I think.
Well, and it's something, especially the last item you just touched, that you probably built that rebellious personality because there was some oppression around you, and you want to find a way to be yourself. And it seems to me that it's very much reflected in your writing. When you categorize yourself as a transgressive novelist, I think it's somehow related to the way you grew up and all the oppressors that were trying to tell you what to do, think, and the way you could act. So probably related to that. By the way, when you say you are a transgressive writer, what does that mean exactly? Because I'm interested in the thing you are transgredding. What is it?
In general, I can define, because many people ask me that question. Simplified transgressive fiction is the definition of it, I can say, is whatever that goes against the norms. Whatever norm is that, because you cannot categorize this genre under a specific period of time or under a specific country, because something that I can transgress in my country might not be similar to your country, or the way that a person can be transgressive in a certain period of time or a place cannot be the same. So in general, overall, it's when and it's a character-driven fiction that it goes against any norms that confine them. So it comes from that. But the transgressive fiction can be purely about normal average life of a person, can be from the perspective of a person that is normally abnormal, count as, for example, a serial killer, a pedophile. It can be mixed with other topics, such as other genres, such as science fiction, romance, everything like that. So because of that, for me, I mix these together. So yeah, it depends. It depends on the type of the book, but generally, I can define it as that.
So are the norms in everyday life, or are they the norms of the traditional literature, or it can be both?
It can be a general idea of that. For example, you create a character that it goes against the norms of a whole society, or it can be a character that is going against the norms that is imposed on him individually. For example, Kafka, Metamorphosis is a transgressive fiction because it's going against what was that character.
Yeah, that's a good example. That's probably the classical example that he turns into a spider, if I remember well, and he's being told
beetle, I think, a cockroach, something like that.
A cockroach or something like that, yeah. And then he needs to go to work and he doesn't want to. So it's somehow, the artist who wants to pursue a different life than the one is being told by his parents and by the wider society. You were born on a U.S. Air Force base in Germany. Not many people can say that, I don't know how many hundreds can claim that they came to Earth in the middle of the military. And for some time, we were traveling around, as far as I understood. Can you talk me through that?
Well, very long story short, as I said, my mother's family came to the land of Israel 102 years ago when they heard that the Jews were returning. This was after actually they heard about it during First World War when some of the British forces were in Iraq, and Jewish communities usually worked together. They did business. And if you went from Afghanistan, say, to Persia or to Iraq and places, you usually were hosted by the Jewish community because you went to the synagogue. They were always very religious. And the rumors started spreading that Jews were returning. So my grandfather and my great-grandfather, they came to Israel in 1918 to see that this was indeed happening. Jews were returning. They saw, yes, they went back. It takes them a year to get here, a year back, gather the whole family. And he was the head of the Afghan Jewish community. And they came to the land to Jerusalem and lived in Jerusalem. So my mother was born here. And her sisters, who were much older, were married to Jews of German descent. And after World War II, their families who remained in Germany, they went back to Germany to try to find family and locate relatives. So my mother's sisters went with their husbands. There were two, went to their husbands, and they lived in Frankfurt as they had a business there. They had a restaurant. And when my mother finished her military service in the late 1950s, she went to visit her sisters in Germany. And they had a restaurant that was serving American GIs. And my mother, this Afghan descended Middle Eastern Jew, dark-looking, very pretty woman, fell in love with this blonde, blue-eyed American non-Jew. The opposites attract. He was attracted to the dark Middle Eastern woman. She was attracted to the blonde, blue-eyed American. And they got married. My dad converted to Judaism. Very interesting. When I did the DNA test, they show one side. So I knew my mother's family was very simple. Babylonia, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan. Suddenly I have, again, in the two cases, I had two cases of Middle East basin, meaning Turkey, land of Israel, Egypt. But then I have Italy, Britain, Spain, Netherlands, Germany. It's like the entire history of persecution of Jews from Italy, being taken from the land of Israel to Italy. And this could only be my father's side of the family. And my grandfather did say to me years ago when there was this whole thing of roots in the United States, the series, there was a television series. So many Americans check their roots. And my grandfather says to me, you know what? And these are what I call redneck Americans from middle Pennsylvania. You can't be more goy than that. Here they're saying that when they checked it, when they went back, that their relatives who came about 100 and some 200 years ago from Prussia were most likely Jewish. Their last name was Zeman, and they changed it into something easier for the Americans in Ellis Island. But the interesting thing was that years later, I learned from a relative whose last name was von Stetten, which is definitely not Jewish. And he says to me, oh, you know, your grandmother, I spoke there. And he says, oh, you speak with the passion of a Methodist preacher. And I laughed. I said, oh, thank you. And he says, no, I'm serious. You know, your grandmother was Methodist. So I had no idea. I knew they were Protestant. And he says, no. So you probably don't know that your grandmother was Jewish. I say, what? Riesinger is a Jewish last name. They were Jewish as well. So I find out that also probably on my father's side, they were Jewish. But skipping all that history, coming to the early 1960s, I was born there. Then my parents married. I was born in the American Air Force Base in Germany. My dad was in the American Air Force. We went around to North Carolina, to Turkey, to Pennsylvania, to Florida. My dad then retired after 20 years in the American Air Force. And my mother said, well, why don't we try Israel? And in 1971, we moved to Israel. For us as kids, it was, all right, it's another country we go to. Every year we moved a house. Every 2 years we moved a country. So we're just moving to another place. We always heard about Israel, but, you know, I was usually the only, when we grew up in the South United States in the 60s, I was like the only Jewish kid around. My mom being Israeli.
How did that feel to be the only Jewish in the block?
I give a lot of credit to my mother, and I think because she's Israeli, she never hid it. She was never shy about it. She was never, so any place we went, I remember I was once made fun of in Christmas because, what are you going to get for Christmas? And I said, nothing. I don't celebrate. Oh, you don't celebrate it. You're not getting, you were a bad boy. And I said, no, we're Jewish. Oh, you're Jewish. And it was about the extent of, I don't even see it as anti-Semitism. It was haunting and the kids doing things. My mom didn't take kindly to it. And she went to the school to say, look, you have to educate your kids here. And to the credit of the school, in the 1960s in the Deep South, they gave my mom the stage to come to every class and talk about what is Jewish and how we celebrate things differently. And in the Christmas pageant that we had, and I went to a public school, as you can obviously tell, at the Christmas pageant, at the end of it, they then said, this thing I remember very vividly, we have our Jewish friends here, they're celebrating Hanukkah, and they did this song about the dreidel, and everybody was clapping. And afterwards, a lot of people came up to my mom and said to her, wow, it's so, and they introduced my mom to the school. And a lot of the parents came up to my mom afterwards and said, wow, we're Jewish as well. How did you have the nerve to say that you're Jewish? And my mom said, how did you not have the nerve to say this? And I remember that very vividly. And I've always been an unapologetic, proud Zionist and Jew because of my mother. And I give credit to my dad's family as well. We were family. So when people talk to me about Christians, to me, it's family. It's not just Christians. And they were very receptive and very accepting. And we would celebrate Christmas at their place, and they would come to our place to celebrate Hanukkah. And it was wonderful. I only years later realized the tensions that supposedly exist. It's not that they didn't try to convert me. I would get these brochures from Baptists. I never paid attention. I would give it to my mom. What did I understand? And my mom would write them back, thank you very much, but we're Jewish. We appreciate your trying. And I still treat that to this day when I have Christians trying to convert me. I say, I'm very confident in what I believe in. I thank you. Someday if the Messiah does return, we'll know if it's Jesus or somebody else. And even if it is Jesus, he's going to say, when they tell him he's Christian, he's going to say, no, I'm not. I'm Jewish. So it's a no-lose situation for us. But so I grew up with that. And then when we came to Israel, it was very shocking to find out everybody's Jewish. The guy at the store is Jewish. The guy peeing in the middle of the street. I remember saying to him, I was 10 years old, saying, that guy is Jewish too? Oh, yeah. Everybody was Jewish here. So it was very interesting. It was a wonderful country. I remember waking up the first day we were in Ashkelon. Ashkelon is the city nearest the Gaza Strip. Yeah. And I remember waking up. They put us in a immigrant ole, as we call it, reception area. And we opened our windows to the Mediterranean Sea. It was near the beach in Ashkelon. Wonderful sun. The weather was perfect. The blue sea. And here we grew up, and even though 2 years later was the Yom Kippur War, we had the Christianing, the baptizing, and becoming Israeli. I was almost 13 years old, and we had our first war.
What would be the differences between, let's say, the Irish audience and the rest, like the American, the British? I don't know if there are others you want to bring to the table.
Well, Irish, Liverpool, Newcastle, Manchester, we're all the same. So in general, an Irish audience is they want to have a good time. There's very little of this. It does happen, but there's very little. In Liverpool, for example, they have one of the biggest comedy clubs in Europe over there, and they see all comedians of all standards. And so when I did a show over there and I'm talking to the audience, they're expecting a high level, but they are there to support the acts. Like, they do quite a lot of kind of new material stuff over there, where literally it could be something that someone came up with on the walk to the stage. It's very rare that something like that works, but they'll be there to support that act. Most of the time in Dublin, it's the same. In New York, it is very much impress me first. So impressed, as in the audience are saying that. They're not quite like this. They are to some comedians, but again, the Irish thing works. But they're very much they're wary of a new face. They want to get to know you first and see if this is going to work, you know. So like I was doing the hour show over there, and I had a local act to support me, but I would go on before the local act and have a chat with them to say, this isn't the show, this is just us breaking the ice together, because I don't want this happening when my show starts. I want you to be laughing at that stage. So we'd have a little bit of banter with them, get to know everybody, and like we said earlier on, look around the room. What are we going to have to deal with? And then the opening act would come on. They're local, they're happy. We have a break, and then I come on. I've already met everyone. They're already comfortable with me, and then we move on from there. But you don't need to do that everywhere. But the kind of the New York audience, they're spoiled. They've had such great comedy for a million years that they are quite wary. But the rest of us are pretty much the same.
I have a feeling that I know what is the Irish thing. I've been living here for 8 years, so I might know what you are talking about, but I'm not sure about everyone that is watching us. So would you expand that concept of the Irish thing?
Yeah, so there's a great phrase. It's an Irish and Scottish phrase. And it's mostly said in Scotland, but it is, I wouldn't call the Queen my granny. So what that means is, like, you wouldn't see anyone above you and there's no one below you. We treat everybody the same. And like, whether you're the president, Michael D. Higgins, or we're getting our burger from you around the corner, everyone is treated the same. And generally that revolves around a lack of formality. We're not very formal people. We'll have a bit of crack and a bit of fun. Crack is just saying things you probably shouldn't say at that moment. That's pretty much what it is. Like, if you ever see an Irish person,
I do it very often. I didn't know
there you
that.
go.
Yeah.
You're one of us. You're one of us. But you kind of, like, anytime you see an Irish person, a sober Irish person, having an interaction with the Gardaí, there's always crack involved. There's always banter involved. Now, that's assuming they haven't pulled you over because you've got guns and drugs in your boot. Like, if it's just a normal interaction, that doesn't happen in America. They do not talk to anyone in authority the way we talk to them. But we can go anywhere in the world, and we're the cheeky Irish or whatever. And crack, generally, how I explain it is, it's just saying things you probably shouldn't say in that situation due to formality. So, whether you're speaking to a policeman, Michael D. Higgins, or the barman down the road, we speak to everyone the same. And the people who are used to being spoken to in a formal way, they love it. They absolutely love it. So that's why we're popular all around the world.
Oh yeah. That's a fact. That I think there is something about the Irish charm, and I think the accent helps, because it's kind of there's something fun about it. Maybe it's the pace, maybe it's the rhythm, or some sounds. It's just it's the same like between us, like Portuguese and the Brazilian. So Portuguese would sound like British, British, let's say, from London, very serious, and like kind of intellectual all the time. So if I want to say a joke in Portuguese, let's say, to a Brazilian, let's say I'm single again and I want to impress a Brazilian girl with a joke, I need to tell her I'm joking. Otherwise, she might think I'm saying something serious, which sucks, let's say, when you are trying to conquer a woman's heart. Now, I have a Brazilian friend who is very religious, and he knows the Bible from A to Z, and I love to listen to him. He's very spiritual. He's not just religious, more of a spiritual person. But because of his accent, you are always like, are you telling a joke, or is something that we should take it, as the word of God or something like that? But he cannot help himself. It's just the way he speaks, and there's nothing we can do about it.
Well, the big reason why the Irish accent is so appealing to everyone, you see it, you live here. We suffer from a condition called the big Irish head. So our Irish heads are quite big, and as you can see, bumpy. We're not the most attractive of species, but we have an accent that could melt chocolate. Like, it's very smooth. We could run those phone lines that only adults ring with this voice, So yeah, that's why we have the voice, the accent we have, is because we have big Irish heads.
The US is it's a place full of events, some nice ones, some not so nice. It's US. It's too big to be just beautiful or just to be ugly. It's just impossible to reduce to one adjective.
I love your diplomatic skills here. Like the way you are phrasing it, it's really nice. Full of
so I'll be popular in the US, at least for one reason. So you are seeing things firsthand, and I'm very interested in how are you perceiving what's going on in America, especially in universities, because from Europe we can see things on the internet, we can hear from friends, but you are there, and you are not just there. You go and talk to them, so you are the right person to tell the audience what's going on.
Again, whenever I talk to people, I always say, you don't need to believe me. And what I am trying to encourage people is to think for themselves, So if you question something I say, go after it yourself. What I can tell you is that I'm definitely less diplomatic than you are in general. And even though since I've moved to the US, which has been now 8 years ago, my language softened, but I'm still a very Eastern European non-PC person. So that causes me a lot of trouble in that sense. But to answer your question, what we are seeing in the US, specifically focusing on campuses, it's not something new. So what we see today is, a heightened attention given to the campuses, but we had these things prior to October 7th. Yeah, we didn't have these encampment setups, but we did have Apartheid Week where they were saying, death to the Jews, death to the Zionists on Columbia campus in particular. I attended the Apartheid Week there not once, and they even refused to talk to me as a non-Jew simply because I have talked to a Jew before asking them. And so for me, those were all wake-up calls, how there is zero intention to have a dialogue. And, me as an activist, I went through my own kind of like waves. In your 20s, you want to change the world and you are okay to be aggressive and loud. And you believe that the more loud you are, the better your chances to convince the other person. But then with age, you mature and you understand, it's not how it works. It's a lot of psychology. So for the last couple of years, I spent so much time really meeting with people who think totally differently than I am. And we had heavy conversations. In fact, since I moved to Boulder, I met a person who is from Gaza City, and we spent 3 hours locked in a car, both of us really, really trying hard to have a conversation. Even though he is in the US, he's still really not having a good opinion about Israel. And I'm not going to, disclose more about his private life out of respect. But he is really not friendly towards Israel, but he has no problem with Jews per se in America. That was one of the hardest and toughest 3 hours of my life, but I appreciated that he also tried and I also tried. And then October 7th happened, and my appetite for this kind of heavy conversation definitely shrinked and almost disappeared at one point, because I can say about myself, like I felt so much frustration, anger, even hatred, how people really question what went down on October 7th and how this whole got twisted. And it's troubling because you lose your faith in humanity. And, I'm not even Jewish, but I'm a vocal Zionist. So most often than not, people assume that I am Jewish. Like on Instagram, most of the comments would be towards me as a Jew. Go back to Poland, you dirty Jew, and so on and so on. So I do feel this hatred and Jew hatred on my own skin, even though I'm not Jewish. And just 2 days ago, I actually gave 2 lectures at the University of Denver. And then I did go out and checked out the tents, which now already, are here in Denver. And I had a conversation with one fellow who is a big supporter of this encampment, so seemingly anti-Israel. And since October 7th, this was the first conversation where I was okay to have the deep conversation. This guy and myself, we disagreed on most of the things, but he at least tried to listen. He didn't scream, he didn't yell, he didn't, go violent. And here is my takeaway. literally he spelled out that the IDF is or was partaking in October 7th. And he feels nothing is wrong with this statement, which is literally to going along the lines when, they said that 9/11 was an inside job of Israel and the Jews. So basically October 7th has the same kind of ideology around that Israel created this in order to wipe out Gaza. And there you are standing and you're like, whew, what is the right answer? So my answer was, that first of all is extremely far-stretched assumption. And also everything of this is going against the Jewish values. Jews value life. And the Jewish communities are still struggling to get to the same level of population as they were before the Shoah. So no Jewish community in their right mind would sacrifice this amount of people for something of that. And that would also require you to glorify death for something so it's everything is going against the Jewish values with this assumption. The other thing that we can see on college campuses, is here, not in Denver, but in New York, for example, the violence and how it is normalized. But it comes a lot from social media and how we normalized hatred and open violence and the call for violence against Jews and Zionists and their allies for years. It's been for years that, things on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and Twitter could circulate that people are literally showing you how to stab a Jew. And that was okay to be on these platforms. So this younger generation grows up with this normalized hatred. And then, the first moment they get a chance, they put this on the street as well. And this is why they are so kind of brave to say, you should be killed. And they say it into the face of a Jew in New York City without fear and consequence, a fear of consequences. How we got here, obviously, it's manifold, starting from the hijacked education system, which again is not an anecdote, it's a proven fact, how much money Colombia and others got from Qatar and countries which from a Western point of view are absolutely not aligned with those values that we fought for and our parents fought for. So that is in and of itself a problem. And then add to that this new generation's attention span, which is around 3 to 5 seconds. So they don't go into the details. They hear the good slogan, like from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Which river, which sea, nobody cares. It sounds good. I'm gonna be famous by saying this. And with this, we go to the third big thing, the psychological effect on this, because today's generation, if you ask them, what do you wanna be? Most of the 19/20 something years old are going to say, I wanna be famous. I wanna be rich and famous. It's not like I want to be a lawyer or a doctor like our parents. No, I want to be famous. How can you be famous today? If you're riding the waves of the given algorithm and the given trends. So today, tearing down a poster of the kidnapped kids made you famous. And they don't care how they are getting famous for or what they are getting famous for. And also this generation, as opposed to yourself and myself, they grew up with such a level of comfort that most of them don't even understand. So in America, I really am having a hard time with this discussion over privileges, because here the privilege is primarily between white people and people of color. But myself, who grew up in under the Soviet Union as a white person, I don't find myself privileged. So for me, the biggest privilege in the world is to be an American. And they don't even know it yet, or this generation at least. Their biggest problem is, which of the latest iPhones to get and when, which college to attend, which car to get. And so it's a problem because they don't have anything higher than themselves to fight for. And every smart psychologist and rabbis also talk a lot about this. Unless you have something bigger than you in your life to work towards, you're going to be lost, hence the depression and so on. So these people now, these young people saw a cause which from the outside seems so easy. There are poor kids who are dying in Gaza. Obviously, your heart goes out to those civilians and the kids, but they did not go into the cause and causality effect and, like what caused and how did we get here. And yeah, so this is in a nutshell. I could, give a whole lecture about this, but these three main pillars, in my opinion, are a big problem that we are seeing with the young generation.
Yeah, there's a lot of contradictions. Like if you examine what is the structure behind the society they want to put in place, the educational system, even social media, how they are used as a tool. It's full of paradoxes. It's like again, we can give a whole lecture about it. And I will give an example here from Ireland. So there's a football team here. Football, as we think in Europe, not soccer, which is a word I hate as a big football fan. Like all the football teams here are very much pro-Palestinian or pro-Hamas without them knowing. But some are more than others. The one that is really, really keen on justice and equality and all these slogans, brainless slogans, is a team called Bohemians. So the other day they scheduled a match between their female football team with the female football team from Gaza, and they say this is a match for democracy. And it turned out that all this Gaza football team will come up with not with hijab, but with their faces very much covered, and that's probably one of the symbols of oppression against women. So I don't know how can they not figure it out that they are not partnering with the right people for that purpose, but they don't see it. And if you call it out, all they will tell you is that you are Islamophobic, that you are a white person who doesn't care about the rest of the world. So I also think that most of these people don't take the time to think what's going on. They just accept what they see on the news. They just assimilate whatever they are told, and life is good. So I think that's a big division between those who take the time to understand things and make their own conclusions. Sometimes they are right, sometimes they are wrong, because they're human beings, and the robots, automats, who just accept things. And I think most pro-Palestinians are on the latter.
Talking about this face cover, I don't know if you have seen that video in which in London, they are asking young women to try on a half hijab and to see and experience it for themselves. And these young girls are happily doing that, and then they are posing in that. And as you said, there is so much contradiction, but also a level of cognitive dissonance that I can't even digest. Like, I don't understand. This young generation, as I said, and I keep on saying, this iPhone example, because it's the truth. When Apple comes out with the latest iPhone, look at them. They are there pre-ordering it like days before, but they would imagine or even consider living in a society where you need to have a hijab, where all you are doing here is shopping for the sexiest clothes ever. And so the other thing on the same merit, at Columbia University, there was an imam when in the heightened moments. And these American kids joined behind him for a Muslim prayer, which in and of itself, before anyone drops again the Islamophobic thing on me, is not a problem. The problem is that it happens on a college campuses under the pretense of free Palestine. And we all know that the statistics show that, in America, the young generation is less and less likely to continue going to the church, let it be Christian, or like in Jewish faith, so much interfaith marriage. And so religion is something to look down in this society today. And yet, when it comes to an imam and the Muslim prayer, people are almost like putting it here on a pedestal, like as if, and now it just comes to me, this thought the first time since I'm spelling it out, as if you would need to feel guilty of something